All right, the New York Times being blasted for bias after a leaked transcript reveals its new plan to go after President Trump. The paper's executive editor forced to hold a crisis town hall meeting last week after liberal backlash for changing a headline about recent shootings. From Trump urges unity versus racism to assailing hate but not guns. In the leaked transcript, the editor, Dean Baquet, is quoted as saying, "We build our newsroom to cover one story. We did it truly well. But after Russia collusion fell apart, the editor says his paper is focusing on a new narrative, race." Here's a quote. "Now we have to regroup and shift resources and emphasis to take on a different story." So, Jesse, this transcript was very revealing, but it also, I think, solidified a lot of what we already knew.
Right. Well, it was revealing in the sense that they admitted that they were unable to take out Trump. They've admitted that they're not as influential as they think they are. And they admitted they're not journalists, that they're partisan activists. Because a real journalist would go back the last 2 years and look, how did this Russia hoax actually come into being? But they're spending no time looking back. They've turned a blind eye to it, and then are now just looking at what else can take out Trump. Race, I don't believe, will have the same type of effect against the president as the Russia thing did. You could see the ratings for the cables that pushed that hoax are not rebounding as they pivot to race. And approval for Donald Trump among Hispanics and Black Americans since January has actually gone up. So it's also not a very inspiring message to say that the country is founded on racism, it's a racist nation, and we need to destroy it and institute socialism in order to heal it. That type of messaging, that this country's racist and that Trump is racist, that all Trump voters are racist, are going to turn off the very voters that the Democrats are going to need to recapture those Rust Belt districts in order to win back the White House. Because race isn't going to work. It's got to be health care, education, as Juan said, and jobs.
Juan, you look like you have something to say in response to that.
Well, I do, Your Honor, and I just want to I want to cede my time to Mr. Waters, because I think he's indicting himself, and I just want more of his testimony. Russia hoax.
Yes.
Did you miss the entire Mueller report that said Russia interfered in the 2016?
The hoax was there was collusion, Juan.
All right.
No, that
was the hoax.
It was. This is what you. There was no finding of any collusion, no investigation. It was an investigation into conspiracy, and they didn't find a conspiracy.
no conspiracy or
as a journalist, do you think this type of conversation about activism
Let's move on
is
after he brings it
No,
up.
because I said I would cede the point to Jesse, because I think he's indicting himself.
Well, as a journalist for many years, do you think that these conversations about the activism are appropriate?
Oh, well, look, I just think you look at the numbers. We had a poll here at Fox last week. It said 2/3 of Americans think he's tearing the country apart. And that includes, by the way, more than 60% of white Americans. So something is going on in terms of the social fabric. And if you're a journalist, how could you not pay attention to it? To my mind, you know what, it's like this is not a new topic for the Times. The Times has been covering. I think yesterday they had a magazine dedicated to slavery. So this is something that they need to do. And I think that what you hear from Dean Baquet is, look, we put a lot of effort into covering Mueller and the conspiracy argument, Jesse, and I think they did a pretty good job. They were way ahead of other people saying that they didn't think that Mueller was coming.
They didn't do a very good job.
I think they were ahead of saying, certainly ahead of all those people who were over at the other channels feeding this conspiracy. They were not in that camp.
Wait, the other channels follow everything that's written in the Times.
All right,
I think they may, but they didn't do it.
The conspiracy is that they're creating a framework to shape the news, to lay out a blueprint so you can just slot in all the stories about race. Whether the polls say that they think Trump is tearing the country apart is irrelevant, because it's the media that is creating the narrative that people hear about. The fact is, the curtain is now pulled back. We see this, and we're surprised. The rest of the media smirks because it's been this way all along. The problem, so why are they doing it? Is because racism is a quantity where in the media the demand exceeds the supply. So they're going to have to keep creating this. They're going to have to keep doing this. And to your point, that slave story, the slave article was probably, I didn't read it, but I'm assuming it was probably well researched. It was probably well done, but I didn't read it. But now my assumptions are this is all part of a greater narrative to paint Donald Trump as racist. So I'm going to look at everything they do as somehow artificially constructed to demonize somebody. And it's not going to stop. It's going to get worse. And we have to admit, this country over time gets less racist. Do you think we're more racist now than we were in the 60s or the 50s or the 1860s? It's getting better, but they don't like that story. Things are going so well that they need to demonize everybody. So right now, the gray lady this is bigger than Watergate. Gray lady is Nixon in drag at this point.
Well, you know, you're
Dana.
right. I think things are getting better in terms of race.
Of course they
in
are.
In terms of, like, if I compare where my father was to where
Right.
I am, I don't think there's any question. But I will say this, look.
And there, Juan.
Anybody, I'm sorry?
And your point there.
Oh.
No, you agree.
Okay. Well, I know I was confirming something. But I think that anybody who has covered Trump as a real journalist knows that he has had trouble with the race issue all along. Federal suits about housing discrimination, the birther movement, Mexicans rape. I mean, I could go on, Central Park 5. I wrote a book about this a year ago. That has nothing to do with somehow, it's suddenly discovering we're going to make something out of this. No, it's just been an issue with Trump.
If you take each one of those separately, they add up to very little, so that's why you have to list them.
Dana.
I think on the Russia thing, a lot of people that work in news, you had to invest a lot of time to read all of their pieces, and it was a lot of time, and a lot of it was always hinting that Trump was behind it. And so all the podcasts, all the things that they did, and I'm just for reporting the news. But I think one of the things that's happened is there's this generational change in the newsroom. So like Dean Baquet, I don't think that I don't know exactly what, I'm not going to try to put words in his mouth, but there's this generational change where now I think it's partly because of the way universities train journalists now, and that they're activists. And instead of just reporting the news, so like news organizations used to be worried that they might make their advertisers mad. You worked in magazines, right? They were like, oh, well, they're not going to like to see that article next to their picture of their great product. That was their worry before. Now they're worried about their own reporters. And I'm just for just report the news. Plus, bashing the media is now a bipartisan sport. Where does Bernie Sanders figure out a way to get his base energized? By bashing the media.
But to your point, New York Times is no different than Media Matters, right?
Right.
Yeah, because they're both pushing an agenda, a political, ideological agenda.
That's not true.
Well,
And I'm glad you said that, Dana. I'm glad you said that, Dana.
That's
didn't
not
say
true,
that.
Greg.
Dana said that the New York
I
Times
did
is no
not
different
say
than the
that.
Media Matters. She did.
All right, fact check, not true.